Hey, what's going on, everyone?
I'm back.
Mario, Zelda, and Metroid. If you've been a long-time Nintendo fan, then you might be familiar with the so-called Nintendo Triforce, which of course, in part relates to the Triforce from the Legend of Zelda series, but it also relates to the top 3 Nintendo IPs that arguably get people the most excited, or are considered the top tier of Nintendo output. 3 Nintendo series that hold the biggest clout, the greatest pride of Nintendo software greatness, the 3 IPs that you know when announced, and when Nintendo are on development fire, these IPs have virtually no equal in the world of Nintendo, or even outside of it. Basically, the trifecta of Nintendo IPs. As I mentioned at the start, Mario, Zelda, and Metroid were known as the Nintendo Triforce, the 3 big Nintendo IPs that met all the criteria I mentioned earlier. But as the years have gone by, much has changed with these IPs, and each one has seen a number of bumps on the road that have left many fans no longer as eager or excited to the level of hype that they once brought. But for the most part, Mario, at least in his 3D form, and Zelda, mostly in his 3D form, have maintained that level of excitement for them to, in my opinion, still hold onto their pieces of the Triforce quite easily. But can the same be said for Metroid, a series that has seen more than a few bumps in the road over its appearances on most Nintendo platforms? But just like Mario and Zelda, when Metroid hits that spot, there's nothing else like it. And even based off the reactions to the announcement of the Metroid Prime 4 trailer, Metroid, at least in its closer community, still holds its piece of the Nintendo Triforce. But even with the announcement of Prime 4, I think perhaps through a general consensus, Metroid has now lost its piece of the Triforce for many, and people would happily put other Nintendo IPs in its spot. This isn't about my personal opinion, of course. I'm pretty old school when it comes to Nintendo, and if you want to know, I for the most part still consider the Nintendo Triforce to be Mario, Zelda, and Metroid. But at the same time, I could completely understand if people had their own Nintendo Triforce or saw this Triforce differently now. But what I briefly want to talk about is, if we did remove Metroid from the equation, at least in terms of this conversation that we're going to have, what other Nintendo IP could fit the gap? An IP that now meets all the criteria that I mentioned earlier. The hype, the budget, the development process, the name that as soon as it's mentioned, that almost sits in a field of its own with little competition when it's at the top of its game. Thinking about that criteria, I think we can narrow it down to a very small number of Nintendo IPs. The ones that don't sit in there, in my opinion, are IPs like Kirby, Yoshi, even Fire Emblem, even though it's had some recent success. Star Fox, regrettably, although Star Fox, if given the time and budget, like I've said in the past, check out my Star Fox video if you haven't done so already. Star Fox could have been a Triforce piece contender, I feel. A few other IPs that haven't quite got there for various reasons, I feel, are Pikmin, which I personally love, but I can understand at the moment how it couldn't quite represent all the criteria I mentioned. Same goes for the likes of Wave Race and Pilot Wings, and once again, regrettably, I have to put F-Zero in this bracket, a series that, although hits many of the criteria marks, is certainly not ever going to be a system seller or be able to capture enough attention from the market based off the nature of its IP, which is unfortunately in today's gaming world a bit niche. So what other big Nintendo IPs do we have left? Pokemon, a name which is now so worldwide known, you could argue that it is the most popular video game franchise ever made, especially based on sales. It has got the history, it's got everything. But the reason why I wouldn't consider it a Nintendo Triforce piece in terms of being able to be up there is just how Pokemon has been treated from its pretty much from its start to its modern day. It's just never had the ambition and the budget to go where it could realistically go. So that's why I wouldn't include it as part of a Nintendo Triforce piece, even though popularity wise it's obviously up there. Donkey Kong, a name that is more well known than most video games in the world, and even though Donkey Kong's platforming history has been mostly stellar, especially with Tropical Freeze being, in my opinion, the best 2D platformer I've played, His influence and excitement levels have unfortunately greatly waned over the years for many, I feel. But DK still has the potential to create great excitement if he can capture a wider audience once again. So I'm not quite ready to write off Donkey Kong just yet. Now, of course, when I mention Mario, I refer to his platforming roots than his spin-offs, and it would be insane not to mention Super Mario Kart when it comes to the Nintendo Triforce. Mario Kart as a series has without a doubt had a massive impact on Nintendo and its fans and the general consumer base. And the latest Mario Kart 8 had and achieved most, if not all, the criteria I mentioned. Mario Kart is up there, for sure, but the same can be said for other spin-offs like Paper Mario, Mario Party, or even Mario Maker, which unfortunately, with the sequel, never seemed to hold the same level of engagement as the original, even though the sequel was released on one of Nintendo's most popular systems, the Nintendo Switch, of course. And of course, this then leads on to slightly other spin-offs like Luigi's Mansion, which technically I feel has now become a series people are extremely eager to see how great the next game looks. But as a game series itself, it's certainly not up there with Mario, Zelda or Metroid in terms of hype and influence and other criteria. So what's left? Well, I can only think of 3 series, and I'll go in order of where I feel they place. The first is Xenoblade Chronicles. A somewhat surprising entry perhaps, given how new the series still is, but what Xenoblade has achieved as not only a new RPG series from Nintendo, developed by Monolith Soft of course, but a Nintendo IP nonetheless, what Xenoblade has achieved is nothing short of amazing, I feel. It now garners the hype, it has an increasing budget to build bigger and more impressive worlds, the type of worlds that you just don't see coming from other developers. It's becoming well known as a name and its sales are continually growing. But where I feel it doesn't quite make it is in the quality overall, as it lacks that familiar in-house Nintendo meticulous nature of quality. And its games have varied in their execution over the 3 entries it has received so far. But Xenoblade has the potential to be Nintendo's Final Fantasy. Some might consider it already so, and that unto itself is a big deal, I feel. The next series I go to, and one that has improved and has arguably remained the most consistent over its life, is Animal Crossing. Animal Crossing, although arguably niche in its genre, but also certainly unique, has over the years become a system seller for Nintendo, and also a very widely known Nintendo IP. One that after the release of Animal Crossing New Horizons on the Nintendo Switch has now become a sales force to be reckoned with. Being made popular by fans old and new, and also being made popular by a large number of celebrities who played and advertised this game across their social medias, creating a buzz that the series hasn't seen before. The only place I feel Animal Crossing doesn't quite hit the mark, well, it's 2 places really. One is the hype. Like I said, it's a strange series, and the type of hype it can produce is also strange. But that could change, because Animal Crossing New Horizons has possibly achieved that. And the type of hype it can produce is also strange, I feel, that also falls into its content and presentation. New Horizons is by far the best looking game in the series and easily the biggest jump the series has had visually. But because of the type of game it is, I don't feel it can grab the similar type of hype that the Metroid Prime 4 reveal produced. Maybe because of legacy and Animal Crossing getting really big relatively recently. But of course, that's just my opinion. This list isn't definitive for the reason. But the one series that has taken Metroid Triforce piece in terms of hype, budget, being a system seller and showing as a piece of software what can be achieved when the manpower, passion, cooperation and budget is applied, putting it in a place all by itself to the point where it becomes the biggest selling IP in its genre, beating out long-standing names. That series is the Super Smash Bros. Series.
The ultimate showdown is almost here, and I, the announcer, invite you to smash your rivals off the stage in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate!
What Sakurai and his team has achieved with the series hasn't and arguably can never be done again. Smash Bros. Ultimate became a package that can only be described as video games in physical form. It represents not just Nintendo's history in meticulous details, but also represents the best of the wider industry through third-party representation. Representation that you could argue has more care and love put into it than even from those games developers themselves. Smash Bros. Has the budget, the mass appeal, the presentation, and most importantly, the hype. Hype around the gameplay itself, as well as tournaments, as well as what it is, and who could possibly appear in its bundle. A bundle of content we, as gamers, arguably don't deserve for this price. Super Smash Bros. Has transcended its genre and has become something else, something no other developer in the world, you could argue, will ever be able to match. Not just because they won't be able to have Nintendo's IPs, but also because this type of game simply can't exist on the same level, as it takes more than money to acquire such content, and to make such content, it takes something else, something that, as we've seen, only Sakurai, his team, and Nintendo could put together. So personally, I feel that the Nintendo Triforce no longer consists of Mario, Zelda and Metroid. It now consists of Mario, Zelda and Smash Bros. It's not my personal Triforce, like I said, but I feel in terms of the criteria, these are Nintendo's 3 biggest IPs when it comes to biggest impact. But hey, we still have Metroid Prime 4 to come, and who knows what else. Perhaps Samus will come and snatch that piece of the Triforce back soon. Perhaps not. Either way, what are your thoughts? Do you agree? And if not, let me know, and also feel free to share your own personal Nintendo Triforce of games. But as always, thanks for listening, take care at all, and peace.